She came home early from work that night. The house was quiet and dark. As she walked down the hallway, she heard voices coming from her son's room. It was her daughter Sophie's voice, low and tense. She approached, her heart already pounding wildly. And then she heard the phrase that shattered her soul into 1,000 pieces. Ethan's voice, clear as crystal in the silence of the house. She still doesn't know that we're leaving the country. Catherine recoiled, her hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. The air left her lungs. The woman who had sacrificed every dream for them, who had worked to exhaustion to give them a future, had just discovered that she was not part of that future. Tell me where you're watching this story from, and if you enjoy stories inspired by real-life events and that are truly moving, subscribe to the channel to help us grow. The alarm clock on Catherine Ann Miller's nightstand rings at 4:40 a.m., a sound that echoes off the thin walls of the worn wooden house in an industrial suburb of Dayton Neck, Ohio. At 52, Catherine feels every Midwestern winter in her knuckles, a stiffness that cheap black coffee tries, unsuccessfully, to dispel. She is a fair-skinned woman, now paled by the fluorescent lights of the logistics warehouse where she works, with ashen blonde hair that she ties back with a hair tie before even washing her face. While the city still sleeps under the icy glow of the streetlights, she is already in the kitchen, preparing the routine of someone who has learned to silence her own desires so that the noise of others' needs can be met first. The smell of stale coffee permeates the air, mingling with the dampness rising from the basement. Catherine moves with an economy of gestures taught by age and fatigue. Each step is calculated. Each movement has a purpose. She opens the nearly empty refrigerator and takes out yesterday's lunchbox, the same chicken and rice she's been eating for 3 days. There's no time for variety, nor money. The important thing is to have something in her stomach to endure the 12 hours of work on her feet, moving heavy boxes from one side to the other under the watchful eye of a supervisor 20 years younger than her. She sits at the kitchen table, the worn wood lightly scratching her arms. Through the window, the darkness outside is absolute, broken only by the headlights of a lone car passing by. Catherine eats in silence, the sound of her fork against the plastic plate her only company. Her eyes, once a vibrant blue, now seem gray and tired. She thinks of her children, Ethan and Sophie, who are still asleep in the next room. They are the reason for everything, the force that drives her to get up every day before sunrise. The house is small, the rooms are cramped, but for Catherine, it's the whole universe. Every creak of the floorboards, every stain on the wall tells a story. She remembers when Ethan, at 5 years old, drew a sun on the living room wall with a yellow crayon. She was angry at the time, but she never managed to completely erase the drawing. Today, the faded yellow stain is a reminder of a simple happiness, of a time when problems were smaller and laughter easier. She sighs, a low, almost inaudible sound. The clock on the kitchen wall reads 5:15. It's time to go. Catherine washes the plate and fork in the sink, leaving them to dry. She puts on her thick, worn coat, which protects her from the biting Ohio wind. Before leaving, she stops at the door of each child's room. She watches Ethan, tall and strong, sleeping soundly. Then Sophie, her hair spread across the pillow. A deep, painful love tightens her chest. They are her masterpiece, her greatest sacrifice. She closes the front door silently, swallowed by the darkness of the early morning. The walk to the bus stop is a grim routine. The streets are deserted. The silence is heavy. Catherine clutches her bag strapped tightly, feeling the cold pierce through her layers of clothing. She's not afraid of the darkness, but of the monotony. Each day seems like a copy of the last, an endless succession of effort and exhaustion. The only hope that warms her is the image of her children, educated, successful, free from the kind of life she was forced to lead. That image is her fuel, her silent prayer. In the warehouse, the noise of the machines is deafening. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead, creating a cold and impersonal atmosphere. Catherine takes her place on the packaging line, her movements becoming automatic. She doesn't talk to her colleagues, each immersed in their own bubble of exhaustion. The work is repetitive, alienating. Packing, sealing, labeling, repeating. Her thoughts, however, drift away to a time when her hands weren't for carrying boxes, but for creating music. She remembers the weight of a violin under her chin, the sensation of the bow gliding smoothly across the strings. The melody that flowed from it was her true voice, the expression of her soul. A solitary tear escapes and runs down her face, but she quickly wipes it away with the back of her dirty hand. No one can see her cry. Here, weakness is a luxury she cannot afford. She swallows the pain, the longing, and refocuses on the box in front of her. The music has died, but the need to survive continues to play its relentless melody. At the end of her shift, Catherine's body aches in places she didn't even know existed. The walk back home seems even longer. The sun has already set, and the same darkness that embraced her in the morning now welcomes her back. She climbs the steps to the porch, her body heavy with exhaustion. As she opens the door, the smell of food warms the room. Sophie is in the kitchen, smiling. "Mom, I made your favorite dish." Catherine's tiredness seems to lessen a little, replaced by a wave of gratitude, but something in her chest still feels empty, a hollow space that her children's love cannot fill. She smiles back, a tired but genuine smile. "Thank you, darling." As she sits down to dinner, she looks around the small house, at the faces of her children. She did everything for them, sacrificed every dream, but in the silence of her heart, a question haunts her. What if there was something more for her? An echo of a life unlived, a sound she tries to ignore, but which persists. Under her bed, covered in dust, an old violin case holds the silent answer to that question. A secret not even her children know. Beneath Catherine's bed, covered by a thin layer of dust and memories she avoids accessing, lies a carbon fiber violin case, now peeling. In 2002, Catherine was a young prodigy with a guaranteed partial scholarship to Juilliard in New York. But the economic collapse of that decade and the unexpected arrival of her first child changed the course of her story. The bow that once glided over nylon strings has been replaced by forklifts and inventory records. She doesn't lament aloud, but the silence of that wooden box is the loudest scream that dwells in her chest every time she dusts the room, feeling the weight of what could have been. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is silent and the pain in her shoulder keeps her from sleeping, she kneels on the cold floor of her room. Her fingers trace the contours of the case, feeling the grooves and scratches, each a scar of an abandoned dream. She hasn't opened it in years. The fear of encountering the young woman she once was, full of hope and talent, is paralyzing. It would be like facing a ghost, the ghost of a life stolen from her not out of malice, but by life's unforgiving circumstances. At the end of her shift, Catherine's body aches in places she didn't even know existed. The walk back home seems even longer. The sun has already set, and the same darkness that embraced her in the morning now welcomes her back. She climbs the steps to the porch, her body heavy with exhaustion. As she opens the door, the smell of food warms the room. Sophie is in the kitchen, smiling. "Mom, I made your favorite dish." Catherine's tiredness seems to lessen a little, replaced by a wave of gratitude, but something in her chest still feels empty, a hollow space that her children's love cannot fill. She smiles back, a tired but genuine smile. "Thank you, darling." As she sits down to dinner, she looks around the small house, at the faces of her children. She did everything for them, sacrificed every dream. But in the silence of her heart, a question haunts her. What if there was something more for her? An echo of a life unlived, a sound she tries to ignore, but which persists. Under her bed, covered in dust, an old violin case holds the silent answer to that question. A secret not even her children know. Beneath Catherine's bed, covered by a thin layer of dust and memories she avoids accessing, lies a carbon fiber violin case, now peeling. In 2002, Catherine was a young prodigy with a guaranteed partial scholarship to Juilliard in New York. But the economic collapse of that decade and the unexpected arrival of her first child changed the course of her story. The bow that once glided over nylon strings has been replaced by forklifts and inventory records. She doesn't lament aloud, but the silence of that wooden box is the loudest scream that dwells in her chest every time she dusts the room, feeling the weight of what could have been. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is silent and the pain in her shoulder keeps her from sleeping, she kneels on the cold floor of her room. Her fingers trace the contours of the case, feeling the grooves and scratches, each a scar of an abandoned dream. She hasn't opened it in years. The fear of encountering the young woman she once was, full of hope and talent, is paralyzing. It would be like facing a ghost, the ghost of a life stolen from her not out of malice, but by life's unforgiving circumstances. The irony was cruel. She had sacrificed her art so that her children could have the freedom to pursue their own dreams, without the financial constraints that had bound her. Ethan would become an engineer, Sophie a nurse, stable, secure professions, exactly the opposite of the uncertain life of a musician. She succeeded. She gave them the security she never had. But, in doing so, she faded away, becoming a shadow of the woman she could have been. And this awareness haunted her in the quietest moments. There was one night, about 5 years ago, when she almost gave in. It was her late mother's birthday, and the longing was unbearable. She picked up the case, placed it on the bed, and opened the latches. The smell of wood and resin hit her like a wave, transporting her back in time. The violin was there, intact, gleaming in the dim light of the bedside lamp. Her fingers trembled as she touched it. But then, she heard Ethan's footsteps in the hallway. Quickly, she closed the case and shoved it back under the bed, her heart pounding wildly. That near reunion left her shaken for days. It was a reminder that the music wasn't dead inside her, only dormant, a hibernating beast, waiting for the right moment to awaken. But life continued to demand more of her, and the moment never came. Extra shifts became more frequent, bills piled up, and her children's needs always came first. The violin remained in its hiding place, a silent symbol of a promise broken to herself. Now, with her children grown, the house sometimes seemed too empty, the silence too heavy. The reason for her sacrifices was becoming independent, building their own lives. And Catherine began to wonder what would be left for her when they finally left. Just the warehouse, the silent house, and the dusty violin case. The idea was terrifying. The woman she had become existed for others. Without them, who would she be? The answer was there, under the bed, waiting. Ethan Miller, now 26, and Sophie, 24, grew up watching their mother's shoulders become increasingly hunched. To ensure Ethan became a civil engineer and Sophie finished nursing school, Catherine accepted every holiday shift and overtime possible, often sleeping only 4 hours a night. She sacrificed treatment for chronic shoulder inflammation for years to pay for Sophie's lab supplies, smiling through pain as she served dinner, hiding the physical agony behind a resilience that, to her children, seemed to be just a mother's natural state. They remember Christmases when their mother would come home after they were already asleep, silently leaving the presents assembled in the living room before heading out again for her night shift. Her absence was a constant presence, a silent reminder of the price they would pay for their future. Ethan, a tall young man with fair skin and brown hair, inherited his mother's seriousness. He saw the weariness in her eyes and felt a guilt he couldn't name. From a young age, he promised himself that one day he would repay her for all of that. Sophie, with the same blonde hair her mother had in her youth and an expressive face, was more observant. She noticed how Catherine hesitated before raising an arm to reach for something on the top shelf, or how she discreetly massaged her shoulder while thinking no one was looking. "Mom, are you all right?" she would ask, her voice heavy with concern. "Yes, I'm fine, darling. Just a little tired," Catherine would always reply, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The lie was an act of love, but also a wall that separated them. The most painful sacrifice for Catherine was when Sophie needed an expensive laptop for her nursing school projects. That same week, the doctor had insisted she start physical therapy for chronic shoulder tendonitis, or risk permanent damage. Catherine looked at the doctor's prescription and the computer brochure. The choice wasn't a choice, it was an instinct. She worked double shifts for 2 months, surviving on sandwiches and coffee, until she had the money for the laptop. The physical therapy never happened. Ethan and Sophie weren't naive. They knew life was hard, that money was tight. But the full extent of their mother's sacrifice escaped them, veiled by the unwavering strength she projected. They saw the simple house, the worn clothes, the lack of luxuries, but attributed it to a frugal lifestyle, not to a daily battle fought on their behalf. They loved their mother deeply, but saw her as a figure of almost mythical strength, not as the flesh and blood woman who was slowly falling apart. There was a conversation Ethan never forgot. He had just landed his first paid internship and wanted to give his mother a gift, a new coat to replace his old, worn-out one. She refused with firm gentleness. "Save your money, son. You'll need it for your future." At that moment, Ethan understood that, for Catherine, their well-being was the only currency that mattered. Her refusal wasn't out of pride, but out of a love so profound it bordered on selflessness, and that scared him. Sophie, for her part, felt her mother's pain in a more visceral way. As a future nurse, she recognized the signs of chronic pain, the pallor of exhaustion. She tried to help in small ways, massaging her mother's shoulders, preparing relaxing teas, insisting that she rest. But it was like trying to fill an ocean with an eyedropper. The source of Catherine's suffering was systemic. Her work, the lack of money, the years of neglect, and Sophie felt powerless in the face of it all. The weight of gratitude and guilt shaped the two brothers. They became extremely focused, determined to succeed not only for themselves, but to validate their mother's sacrifice. Every high grade, every compliment from a teacher, was a small offering they placed on the altar of maternal devotion. They needed to prove that it was all worthwhile, that her pain was not in vain. This pressure, though unspoken, was the engine that propelled them forward. Day after day, they watched their mother age before their eyes, the lines of worry deepening on her forehead, her blonde hair turning increasingly gray. The vibrant woman in the old photos they found in family albums seemed like a different person. That woman smiled with her eyes, held a violin, had a light that the Catherine of today seemed to have lost. They didn't know the story behind those photos, but they felt the loss of something they never got to know. Their graduation was the pinnacle of Catherine's happiness. Seeing them in their gowns, holding their diplomas, was the embodiment of decades of hard work. That day, she wept openly, tears of relief and pride. For a brief moment, the pain in her shoulder seemed to disappear. Her children were ready. They were safe. But as she embraced them, A new worry began to form in her mind. Now that her mission was accomplished, what would come next? The silence of the empty house seemed more frightening than ever. The year 2026 brought cruel changes to Dayton. New luxury complexes began springing up where old factories once stood, and the rent on the Millers' small house skyrocketed. Catherine stares at the rent increase notices on the kitchen table, her heart racing, feeling the panic of someone watching the ground disappear beneath her feet after decades of precarious stability. She looks at her children, who now earn their own salaries, but the shame of admitting she can no longer manage on her own prevents her from asking for help, turning every conversation into an exercise in pretending that everything is still under control. The city she knew was disappearing. The familiar streets, the small shops, everything was being replaced by glass and steel buildings, expensive cafes, and designer boutiques. It was progress that didn't include her. On the contrary, it pushed her to the margins. The rent increase was the first direct blow, a 30% increase, a number that, for her, was a death sentence. Her salary at the warehouse barely covered her current expenses. With the adjustment, the math simply didn't add up anymore. She hides the landlord's letters under a pile of old newspapers. Every time Ethan or Sophie enters the kitchen, she feels a chill. The fear that they will find the envelopes and discover her vulnerability. She has spent her entire life being the rock, the provider, the solution to all problems. How could she now become the problem? The idea was humiliating. Her pride, forged in years of silent struggle, was an insurmountable barrier. The conversations during dinner became a minefield. Ethan talked about his engineering projects, Sophie about the challenges at the hospital. They were full of life, plans, and the future. Catherine listened, smiled, asked the right questions, but her mind was elsewhere, calculating numbers, imagining eviction scenarios, feeling the knot in her stomach tighten. "Mom, you seem distracted," Sophie commented one night. "I'm just tired from work," she lied. Once again, the lie had become second nature. She began cutting expenses in desperate ways. She turned off the heater during the day, even in the biting Ohio cold. She started eating only one solid meal a day, the one she took to work. She began walking to the warehouse, an hour and a half each way, to save money on the bus fare. The extra effort was taking its toll. The pain in her shoulder became a constant agony, and the exhaustion was so profound that she felt dizzy during the day. The contrast between her secret struggle and her children's flourishing lives was stark. One day, Ethan came home excited, talking about a new car he planned to buy. Catherine felt a mixture of pride and despair. He could afford a car, and she couldn't pay the rent. The distance between their worlds seemed to have become an abyss. She smiled and said, "That's wonderful, son. You deserve it." Inside, she was breaking down. Sophie, with her keen intuition, sensed that something was wrong. She saw her mother's weight loss, the paleness in her face. She tried to probe, to ask, but Catherine was a fortress. The answers were always vague, evasive. Sophie's frustration grew. She wanted to help, but she didn't know how to break through the armor her mother had built around herself. Communication between them, once so easy, was now full of unspoken words and tense silences. The fear of becoming a burden was Catherine's greatest torment. She imagined the scene, confessing to her children that she had failed, that she could no longer support herself. She imagined the worry in their eyes, the obligation they would feel to help her. This would mean that her sacrifice was not complete, that she still needed them, that the freedom she had fought so hard to give them was an illusion. She couldn't do that to them. She preferred to face eviction alone than to destroy the image of strength they had of her. The situation had become unbearable. The landlord's second notice arrived, more harsh, threatening an eviction order. Catherine held it with trembling hands. The paper seemed to burn in her fingers. She looked around the small house, each object a testament to her life, to her struggle. The idea of losing it all, of being thrown out onto the street at 52, was a suffocating terror. She sat at the kitchen table, in the dark, and wept silently, a soundless cry of pure despair. One night, she overheard Ethan and Sophie chatting animatedly in the next room. They were talking about plans, about the future. The joy in their voices was a knife to her heart. They were building their lives, while hers was crumbling. She felt invisible, an old piece of furniture in the house of her own memories. The loneliness was so intense it felt like a physical presence in the room. She didn't know it. But on the other side of the wall, the plans her children were making were very different from what she had imagined. On a Thursday evening, the atmosphere in the small dining room is dense, heavy with a silence Catherine doesn't recognize. Ethan and Sophie exchange quick, almost choreographed glances as Catherine serves the roast chicken. There's a different energy in the house, a restrained enthusiasm that she interprets, with the pessimism of someone who has lost so much, as a sign of estrangement. They speak little to her, focused on whispers about visas, international bureaucracy, and travel bags. Catherine feels a tightness in her stomach, an intuition that the only thing still holding her together, the unity of that family, is about to suffer an irreparable crack. Catherine's fork feels heavy in her hand. She tries to join the conversation, but their words are fragmented, full of codes she can't decipher. They mention city names she's only seen in movies, talk about foreign currencies and different climates. Each word is like a small stone thrown against the fragile glass of her safety net. She raised them to belong to the world, but she never imagined the world would take them so far from her. The chicken on her plate loses its flavor. Ethan, usually so straightforward, avoids her gaze. He seems nervous, anxious. Sophie, on the other hand, seems to be bubbling with an excitement she can barely contain. The combination of the two leaves her confused and frightened. She feels she's on the outside of an important secret, a secret that excludes her. The feeling of being a spectator in her own family is new and terrifying. She's always been the center, the sun around which they orbited. Now, it seems they found a new galaxy. "Mom, we went to the market today," Sophie says suddenly, trying to break the silence. "We bought that mint ice cream you like." The attempt at normalcy sounds forced, artificial. Catherine just nods, a weak smile on her lips. Sophie's kind gesture, instead of comforting her, only increases her feeling of isolation. It's as if they're trying to compensate for something, to sweeten a bitter pill they haven't yet given her. She remembers when they were little, how the house was full of noise, laughter, and arguments. Now, the silence between sentences seems to scream. She looks at her children's faces, faces she knows better than her own, and feels she doesn't recognize them. They've become adults with secret lives, with plans that don't include her. The pain of this is sharp, a silent betrayal she doesn't know how to name. Ethan's phone vibrates on the table. He picks it up quickly, his eyes fixed on the screen. A smile spreads across his face. He shows the screen to Sophie, who stifles a cry of joy. They hug quickly, a knowing and excited embrace. Catherine watches the scene, her heart sinking. "What is it?" she asks, her voice weaker than intended. "Oh, it's nothing, Mom, just something from work," Ethan replies, hurriedly putting the phone away. The lie is so obvious it hurts physically. She gets up to collect the dishes, needing something to do with her hands to disguise the trembling. In the kitchen, she leans against the sink, taking a deep breath. The sound of their whispers starts again in the dining room. Words like passport, apartment, flight reach her like distorted echoes. Intuition transforms into a chilling certainty. They are leaving, and not just to another city. It's to another place. A place very, very far away. The image of an empty house, once an abstract fear, now becomes a vivid premonition. She sees herself alone in that same kitchen, but without the sound of their voices, without their mess, without the life they brought to the space. Loneliness would swallow her whole. She had dedicated every fiber of her being to them, and now they were preparing to cut her out of their lives, as if she were a dead weight they needed to get rid of so they could fly. She returns to the room, her face a mask of neutrality. She won't give them the pleasure of seeing her pain. If they want to go, let them go. She won't beg. She won't humiliate herself. She raised them to be strong and independent. Now, she needs to be strong enough to let them go, even if it destroys her inside. She sits down again, her silence now as heavy as theirs. Dinner ends in an atmosphere of unbearable tension. No one mentions the mint ice cream. Ethan and Sophie retire to their rooms earlier than usual, leaving Catherine alone in the dimly lit living room. She sits there on the old sofa for a long time, listening to the sounds of the house. Each creak seems like a goodbye. The crack she felt wasn't just a crack. It was the sound of her world breaking in two. And she feared that, this time, there would be no way to fix it. The turning point comes on a rainy March night. Catherine returns home early from her night shift due to a problem with the warehouse machinery, and, as she approaches Ethan's room, hears Sophie's voice laden with a cutting urgency. They are discussing plane tickets and deadlines. Ethan mentions that the departure process is finalized and that they will soon be leaving for the other side of the Atlantic. The phrase, "she doesn't know we're leaving the country yet," cuts through the air like a blade of ice. Catherine retreats into the hallway, gasping for air as the certainty of abandonment settles in her gut. She stands paralyzed in the dark hallway, her hand over her mouth to muffle the sound of her own gasping breath. The raindrops hitting the window seem to match the erratic beating of her heart. Every word she hears from Ethan's room is a nail hammered into the coffin of her hopes. They're not just leaving, they're running away. And they're running away from her. The pain is so physical that she bends over, leaning against the wall to keep from falling. We need to tell her, "Ethan." Sophie's voice sounds tense. "We can't just disappear." Ethan's reply is low, but Catherine can hear it. "And what are we supposed to say? Mom, are we abandoning you to live our dream in Europe? She won't be able to handle it." The worry in his voice doesn't comfort her. On the contrary, it humiliates her. They see her as someone fragile, someone who needs to be protected from the truth, like a child. The woman who sacrificed everything for them is now seen as an emotional burden. The conversation continues, revealing details that repeatedly stab her in the back. They have a rented apartment in Lisbon. Ethan got a transfer from his engineering company. Sophie has a job offer at an international hospital. Everything planned, everything organized in secret, behind her back. The betrayal is so profound, so calculated, that Catherine feels the bitter taste of bile in her throat. Her own home has become a nest of conspiracies against her. She turns away from the door, moving like a sleepwalker. She doesn't go into her room. Instead, she goes downstairs and sits in the dark armchair in the living room. The house, which had always been her refuge, now feels like enemy territory. Every object, every picture on the wall seems to mock her. The image of the happy family she had worked so hard to build was a sham. She was the only one who didn't know the script. The rain outside intensifies, and the sound seems to fill the void that has opened up inside her. She thinks of all the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the ignored chronic pain, the dusty violin under the bed, all for what? So that they could build a life she wouldn't be a part of. The ingratitude is a wound that burns more than any physical pain she has ever felt. She feels used, discarded, a tool that served its purpose and can now be thrown away. She doesn't cry. The tears seem to have dried up, replaced by a numbing cold that spreads throughout her body. She feels hollow, emptied of all emotions except one, a deep and overwhelming disappointment. Disappointment not only with them, but with herself. How could she have been so blind? How could she not have seen the signs? Love made her stupid, made her vulnerable. And now she was paying the price. The hours pass. She remains motionless in the armchair, the darkness of the room enveloping her like a shroud. She hears their footsteps upstairs, the lights going out, the house finally plunging into silence. But for Catherine, the silence is deafening. It is filled with the words she heard, the lies she lived. Ethan's phrase echoes in her mind. She won't be able to handle it. Maybe he was right. Maybe she really wouldn't be able to handle it. When the first rays of gray morning light stream through the window, they find her in the same position. Her eyes are open, fixed on a blank spot on the wall. Something inside her broke that night. The resilience that sustained her for decades, the strength that seemed inexhaustible, finally gave way. She is no longer the rock. She is just the wreckage left after the earthquake. She hears the alarm clock ringing upstairs. The sound that once marked the beginning of another day of struggle now sounds like a death sentence. She has nothing left to fight for. The reason for her existence was packing its bags to leave her behind. She gets up, her body stiff and aching. She climbs the stairs, not to confront them, but to take refuge in her room, the only place that still feels like hers. As she walks down the hallway, she sees Ethan's bedroom door ajar. The suitcase in the corner confirms everything. The sight is so definitive, so final, that it sucks the last breath from her lungs. She enters her own room and closes the door, leaning against it. Abandonment is no longer a possibility, it's a fact. And the realization of this hits her with the force of a physical blow, leaving her without ground, without a future, completely and irremediably alone. In the following days, Catherine walks through Dayton like a ghost in her own life. The idea that her children, the only reason she abandoned her music, her youth, and her identity, are planning to flee to Europe without her destroys her inside. She imagines they've grown tired of her weary appearance, her rough hands, and her lack of experience in their modern world. The humiliation of feeling disposable, like an old piece of equipment that has served its purpose and now only takes up space, is a heavier burden than any physical one she has carried in years of manual labor. She continues her routine, but mechanically, devoid of any purpose. She gets up, goes to work, returns home. The actions are the same, but the soul behind them is gone. In the warehouse, she makes mistakes, drops boxes, forgets to label packages. Her supervisor, an impatient young man named Mark, reprimands her in front of everyone. "Where's your head at, Miller? If you can't handle it anymore, there's a line of people wanting your job." His words, which would have previously motivated her to try harder, now only echo what she already feels. She can't handle it anymore. The food has lost its flavor. Sleep has become an intermittent refuge, tormented by nightmares of abandonment. She looks at her reflection in the bathroom mirror and sees a stranger, a 52-year-old woman with sunken eyes, pale skin, and shoulders stooped not from age, but from the weight of uselessness. She wonders if her children are ashamed of her simplicity, of her life spent in an industrial suburb while they dream of European capitals. Interactions with Ethan and Sophie have become torture. She watches them, knowing their secret, and every smile, Every gesture of affection from them seems false, poisoned by lies. They continue the charade, talking about work, the weather, trivialities, while the elephant in the room grows larger each day, suffocating what little air remains. The tension is palpable, a static electricity preceding a violent storm. One afternoon, Sophie arrives home in a new dress. "Mother, what do you think? I'm going to wear it for a special occasion." Catherine looks at the dress, a light, flowery fabric, so full of life and promise. She imagines Sophie wearing it on a Lisbon street, laughing in the sun, far away from her. "It's beautiful, darling," she replies, her voice a hollow whisper. The special occasion, she knows, is her departure, the celebration of her new life, built upon the ruins of her own. Humiliation is a slow poison. She feels like a relic in a museum of her own life. Her children, her curators, keep her there out of a sense of duty, dusting her off now and then. But their eyes and hearts are already on another exhibit, somewhere else. She begins to isolate herself, spending more time in her room, avoiding the common spaces of the house. The silence of her room is more honest than the false harmony of the living room. She thinks of the violin. The case under the bed seems to call to her. For the first time in years, she feels no fear of opening it, but rather a strange affinity. The violin, like her, was abandoned, silenced, left to gather dust while life went on elsewhere. It is the only witness to who she was, the only thing left of her own dreams. Perhaps, in its silence, she could find some solace. The pain in her shoulder worsens each day, a physical manifestation of the emotional pain consuming her. It's as if her body is disintegrating along with her family. She stops taking the cheap painkillers she used to buy. The pain keeps her anchored to reality, a constant reminder of everything she's sacrificed and everything she's losing. It's a self-imposed penance, a punishment for loving too much, for giving herself until there was nothing left. At work, Catherine makes mistakes she's never made before. She fails to label an entire batch, forgets to clock out. Her supervisor, a young man who has never had to choose between his own future and that of his children, makes sarcastic comments about her loss of momentum and suggests that perhaps it's time for her to give way to someone more agile. Catherine lowers her head, accepting the public humiliation because she no longer has the emotional strength to fight. At home, she continues cooking, but the food no longer has any flavor, and she has stopped looking Ethan and Sophie in the eye, living through the anticipatory grief of an empty house. With each mistake, a piece of her dignity erodes. Her supervisor, Mark, seems to take pleasure in her downfall. "Miller, again," he says loudly, for all to hear. "You seem slower than a turtle with arthritis." The laughter of some colleagues is like salt in her wounds. She merely murmurs an apology and returns to work, her face burning with shame. She, who always prided herself on her impeccable work ethic, is now the example of what not to do. The humiliation is a burden almost as heavy as the boxes she carries. At home, silence has become a weapon. She serves dinner and sits at the table, but her eyes remain fixed on her plate. The food, once made with love, is now just fuel, assembled without soul. Sophie tries to start a conversation. "Mom, was it a difficult day today?" Catherine just shrugs. The usual. The barrier she has erected is impenetrable. She doesn't want their pity. She doesn't want the forced compassion of someone about to run away. Silence is her only armor against more pain. She starts making excuses not to be there. She says she needs to work an extra shift, even when it's not true. Instead, she wanders aimlessly through the dark streets of Dayton, the biting cold a welcome distraction from the inner pain. She observes the lights of other families, houses, imagining simple, untouched lives, without secrets and betrayals. She feels like an exile in her own city, in her own life. Loneliness is her only and faithful companion on these nightly walks. The weight loss becomes more pronounced. Her already worn work clothes now seem too big for her shrunken body. The exhaustion is no longer just physical. It's a weariness of the soul. She moves in slow motion, each gesture requiring a monumental effort. The world around her seems to have lost its color. Everything has become a shade of gray, monotonous and oppressive. Joy has become a distant memory, a foreign language she no longer speaks. Ethan watches her from afar, his face etched with worry. He knows she knows. He sees the emptiness in her eyes, the way she shrinks whenever he enters a room. Guilt consumes him. He and Sophie planned everything with the best intentions, but the secret is destroying the woman they love most. He wants to tell her, wants to shout the truth, but the fear that it's too late, that the damage is already irreparable, paralyzes him. One night, Catherine is in the kitchen, late at night, unable to sleep. She opens the refrigerator and stares at its almost empty interior. The cold light illuminates her face, revealing the depth of her sadness. She feels no hunger, nothing but a profound emptiness. She closes the refrigerator door and remains in the dark, listening to the hum of the motor. It's the sound of her life. A constant, meaningless hum running on autopilot while everything around her crumbles. Anticipatory grief is the worst kind of grief. She cries for the loss of her children while they are still there, laughing and talking in the next room. She grieves for the house that will soon be empty, for the memories that will become painful. She is grieving for herself, for the woman she was, and the woman she has become, a shadow waiting to disappear completely. The pain is so present that she can barely breathe. She stops taking care of herself. Her ashy blonde hair goes unwashed for days, tied up in a messy bun. Her nails, once always clean despite her work, are now broken and dirty. It's a silent surrender, an admission of defeat. If she doesn't matter to the people she loves most, why should she matter to herself? The neglect is an outward reflection of the abandonment she feels inside. The countdown in her mind is relentless. 10 days, 9, 8. Each number is another step toward the abyss. She makes no plans for what comes next. She can't think beyond the day they leave. Her mind refuses to process a future without them. It's like trying to imagine life without air. Impossible, inconceivable. And yet, it's happening. And she's completely alone to face it. In a moment of lonely despair, Catherine decides to open the violin case. The strings are rusty and the wood seems lifeless, exactly as she feels. She tries to position the instrument on her chin, but her fingers, stiffened by warehouse work and untreated arthritis, no longer have their former agility. The sound that comes out is out of tune and shrill, a lament that seems to echo the disorder of her own existence. She cries silently in the dim light of the room, realizing that she no longer has a career to return to, and soon, she will no longer have the family that was her only solace. The case creaks as it opens, releasing a smell of dust and old wood that fills the small room. For a moment, she is transported back in time to the young woman full of dreams who kept that instrument with the promise of one day returning. The promise now sounds like a cruel joke. She runs her fingers over the cracked varnish, feeling the texture of neglect. The violin is not just an object, it is a mirror of her own abandoned soul. She picks up the bow, the strange weight in her hand after so many years. Her fingers, used to holding boxes and tools, struggle to find the right position. The muscle memory is there, buried beneath layers of calluses and pain. She takes a deep breath and tries to pass the bow over the strings. The sound that emerges is horrible. a sharp scratch that hurts the ears. There is no music there, only the scream of something that has been broken. The tears she had held back for so long finally came, silent and warm. They streamed down her face and dripped onto the wood of the violin, staining the dust. It wasn't a cry of sadness, but of annihilation. It was the cry of someone who had lost everything twice. First, she lost the music. Now, she was losing the family that had replaced it. The realization that she was doubly helpless was a devastating blow, leaving her breathless. She remembers her teacher, a kind old man who used to say that the violin was an extension of the musician's soul. If that were true, her soul was out of tune, damaged, incapable of producing anything beautiful. The shrill sound she produced was the soundtrack to her current life, a cacophony of pain, regret, and humiliation. She lowers the instrument, defeated. There is no refuge, not even in her former love. Arthritis throbbed in his fingers, a physical reminder of his limitations. Years of manual labor and lack of treatment had taken their toll. Even if he wanted to, even if he had the opportunity, his fingers would no longer obey. The agility needed for Vivaldi's rapid passages had been replaced by the stiffness of chronic pain. The door to his musical past was not only closed, it was locked, and the key lost forever. She places the violin back in its case with a gentleness she doesn't feel for herself. Closing the lid is like closing a coffin. The click of the latches echoes in the silent room. Final and absolute. It's over. The fantasy that music could be a solace, an escape, crumbles to dust. She is trapped in her reality. A reality that is about to become even more lonely and dark. The crying stops, replaced by a cold apathy. She sits on the edge of the bed, her pencil case at her feet. The room is dark, the only light coming from the crack in the door. She feels completely empty, drained of all emotions, the pain, the anger, the sadness, all gone, leaving behind only a desert. She no longer has a career to return to, and the family that was her only pillar is disintegrating. She looks at her own hands, the hands that once created music and then built a future for her children. Now, they seem useless, worn-out tools that no longer serve any purpose. She clenches them into fists, her nails digging into her palms. The slight physical pain is a focal point, a distraction from the overwhelming emptiness that threatens to swallow her whole. The realization that she is truly alone in the world is terrifying. While her children were under her roof, even with a secret between them, there was a semblance of family. But soon, not even that would remain. Only her, the silence, the bills, and the pain in her shoulder. The image is so desolate that she feels a chill, despite the stuffy air of the room. She begins to notice cardboard boxes piling up in the living room. Ethan and Sophie are organizing their lives with an efficiency that seems cruel to their mother. Catherine finds a brochure about life in Italy in the office trash can and feels a pang of envy mixed with deep sadness. They will see the city she dreamed of visiting when she studied the great composers, while she will likely end her days in a rented cubicle, in a city that no longer has room for the poor and aging. The boxes appear one by one, like silent monuments to their imminent departure. They are stacked in the corners, with handwritten labels, books, winter clothes, documents. Each box is a stab in Catherine's heart. It's physical, tangible proof that their world is being carefully packed away, while hers is being left behind to rot. She looks away, but the boxes dominate the room. The brochure from Italy is colorful and bright. It shows images of the Colosseum in Rome, the canals of Venice, the hills of Tuscany, cities that Catherine only knew from art history books and biographies of Vivaldi and Paganini. The irony is overwhelming. Her children, who never showed much interest in classical music or history, will live the dream that was once hers. Envy is an ugly feeling, and she is ashamed to feel it, but it consumes her nonetheless. She watches them move through the house, a well-tuned pair on their mission to leave. They talk in hushed voices, make decisions, make lists. They are a team, and she is on the outside. Sometimes Sophie stops and looks at her with a guilty expression. "Mom, do you need anything?" The question is empty, a formality. What Catherine needs, they cannot give her. For them to stay, to include her, to see her. The city of Dayton, once the backdrop to her entire life, now feels like a hostile place. The new luxury buildings, the soaring rents, the feeling of being left behind by gentrification. She feels like a stranger in her own land. The idea of looking for a room to rent fills her with dread. She imagines herself living in an impersonal place, surrounded by strangers, without the marks of a life, without the crayon marks on the wall. The sadness deepens, transforming into a bitter resignation. She stops fighting the feelings. She accepts the pain, the loneliness, the feeling of being discarded. It's her destiny, she thinks. Some people are born to build bridges so that others can cross over to better places. She was one of those bridges, and now that her purpose has been fulfilled, she is destined to crumble, alone and forgotten. She finds an old photo album while cleaning a shelf. There are pictures of her as a young woman, smiling, holding her violin. There are pictures of Ethan and Sophie as babies, small and helpless in her arms. She traces their smiling faces with her fingers. Where did that happiness go? How could life have strayed so far from its course? The photos seem to belong to another family, to a story with a different ending. She closes the album quickly. The memories are too painful. The contrast between their bright future and her bleak one is constant torture. They talk about learning Italian, about weekend trips. She thinks about how she'll manage to pay the rent for a room on her minimum wage, how she'll endure the loneliness of winter nights. Their worlds couldn't be more different. They are soaring towards the sun, while she is sinking into darkness. Their efficiency is a form of unintentional cruelty. They clear the shelves, empty the drawers, and every empty space they leave behind is a scream in the silence of the house. Catherine watches them from the doorway, feeling like a ghost in her own home. They don't see her or pretend not to. They are too focused on their task, on their escape. Their energy is one of excitement and anticipation, a brutal contrast to the deadly apathy that consumes her. The city of Dayton, once the backdrop to her entire life, now feels like a hostile place. The new luxury buildings, the soaring rents, the feeling of being left behind by gentrification. She feels like a stranger in her own land. The idea of looking for a room to rent fills her with dread. She imagines herself living in an impersonal place, surrounded by strangers, without the marks of a life, without the crayon marks on the wall. The sadness deepens, transforming into a bitter resignation. She stops fighting the feelings. She accepts the pain, the loneliness, the feeling of being discarded. It's her destiny, she thinks. Some people are born to build bridges so that others can cross over to better places. She was one of those bridges, and now that her purpose has been fulfilled, she is destined to crumble, alone and forgotten. She finds an old photo album while cleaning a shelf. There are pictures of her as a young woman, smiling, holding her violin. There are pictures of Ethan and Sophie as babies, small and helpless in her arms. She traces their smiling faces with her fingers. Where did that happiness go? How could life have strayed so far from its course? The photos seem to belong to another family, to a story with a different ending. She closes the album quickly. The memories are too painful. The contrast between their bright future and her bleak one is constant torture. They talk about learning Italian, about weekend trips. She thinks about how she'll manage to pay the rent for a room on her minimum wage, how she'll endure the loneliness of winter nights. Their worlds couldn't be more different. They are soaring towards the sun while she is sinking into darkness. Their efficiency is a form of unintentional cruelty. They clear the shelves, empty the drawers, and every empty space they leave behind is a scream in the silence of the house. Catherine watches them from the doorway, feeling like a ghost in her own home. They don't see her, or pretend not to. They are too focused on their task, on their escape. Their energy is one of excitement and anticipation, a brutal contrast to the deadly apathy that consumes her. One day, she finds a list on the kitchen table. Buy plug adapters. Confirm Airbnb reservation. Call the airline. It's the checklist for a new life. A life meticulously planned without her. She crumples the paper in her hand, the sound of the paper tearing the only sound of violence in her silent surrender. She throws the ball of paper in the trash, along with the brochure from Italy and the rest of her hopes. The countdown continues. 5 days. 4. The house grows emptier, echoing her footsteps. Pictures are removed from the walls, leaving lighter rectangles that look like scars. Books disappear from the shelves. The house is losing its soul, just like her. Soon, it will be just an empty shell, an abandoned stage where a family once existed, and she will be the only actress left on the stage, without a script and without an audience. It's the eve of the date she heard Ethan mention as the day of departure. The house is strangely empty of personal belongings, but filled with an electric tension that makes Catherine's skin tingle. She decides she won't make a scene, that she will maintain her dignity until the end. She will prepare breakfast one last time, hand over the house keys to her children, and look for a room to rent near the warehouse, accepting the fate of someone who was merely a stepping stone for others to achieve success. The pride of someone who gave everything prevents her from begging for crumbs of attention. That night, she doesn't sleep. She sits in the living room armchair, observing the shadows and the boxes. She silently bids farewell to every corner of the house, to the kitchen where she prepared thousands of meals, to the living room where she watched her children take their first steps, to the hallway where she heard the sentence of her abandonment. It's a silent wake for the life she knew. She no longer feels sadness, only a numbing emptiness. Acceptance is cold and devoid of peace. She gets up before the alarm clock. As always, the decades-old habit is stronger than her despair. She goes to the kitchen and starts preparing breakfast. Pancakes. It's what she used to make on special occasions when they were children. Maybe it's a way to remind them of the family they're leaving behind. Or maybe it's just one last act of love, the only language she truly knows, even if it seems useless now. The smell of pancakes fills the silent house. It's a smell of childhood, of Sunday mornings, of normalcy. For a moment, the tension seems to lessen. Catherine focuses on the task, flipping the pancakes, setting the table. It's a ritual, a dance she knows by heart. It's the last time. The phrase echoes in her mind with every movement. The last time she'll set 3 plates on the table. The last time she'll hear their footsteps coming down the stairs. She decides on her plan with frightening clarity. After coffee, she will hug them, wish them good luck, and hand over the key. She will say she has already found a place to stay, a lie to spare them the guilt. Then, she will go to work, like any other day. Routine will be her only salvation. She won't cry in front of them. Her pain is hers, and hers alone. She will carry it with the same silent strength with which she has carried all her burdens. She hears their footsteps upstairs. Her heart leaps painfully. It's time. She takes a deep breath, straightens her shoulders. The actress is ready for her final act. She puts on a smile, a mask of serenity that cost her every ounce of strength. She will not be the frail mother they fear. She will be the rock she has always been, until the very last moment. They will not see her break. When they enter the kitchen, the sight of the pancakes surprises them. They exchange a look that Catherine can't decipher. There's something different in their faces this morning. It's not the restrained excitement of the last few days. It's something heavier, more solemn. They sit at the table in silence, and the tension, which she thought had dissipated with the smell of food, returns in full force, denser and more suffocating than ever. She serves the pancakes, her hands steady with sheer willpower. She avoids their gaze, focusing on the plates, the fork, anything but the impending farewell. The silence stretches, broken only by the clinking of cutlery. Catherine feels she's going to scream. The forced normalcy is torture. She wants it to end soon, for them to leave and let her be in peace with her pain. Ethan clears his throat, breaking the silence. "Mom?" The word hangs in the air. Catherine finally looks up. The expression on her son's face isn't one of farewell. It's one of fear, guilt, and a determination that frightens her. He pushes a brown envelope across the table toward her. The gesture is so unexpected that she instinctively recoils. Her pride swells, her last line of defense against ultimate humiliation. She doesn't want their money. She doesn't want charity, alms to ease their conscience. "No," she says, her voice firm, surprising herself. "I don't need anything. I can manage." The refusal is her last act of power, her last attempt to keep her dignity intact. But Sophie grips her hand on the table, and the grip is desperate. "Please, Mother, just open it. It's not what you're thinking." In the morning, the sun rises pale over Dayton. Catherine finds Ethan and Sophie seated at the table, but they are in no hurry to leave for the airport. There is a solemnity in the air that makes her pause in the kitchen doorway. Ethan places a brown envelope in front of her, exactly where she used to put the money for the bills. Sophie holds her mother's hands, feeling the constant tremor in Catherine's fingers. Catherine refuses the envelope at first, believing it to be money to help her support herself. A token of gratitude that hurts more than the abandonment itself. "No, I don't want to," she repeats, her voice trembling more this time. She tries to pull her hand away, but Sophie's grip is firm. Catherine's short, worn nails scratch the wooden table. The brown envelope seems like an insult, a symbol of everything she feared, being reduced to a financial problem, an obligation to be repaid. Their charity would be the final confirmation that she had become a burden, the antithesis of everything she had fought to be. "Please, Mom, open up!" Ethan insists, his voice choked with emotion. His eyes, usually so confident, are now filled with a vulnerable plea that disconcerts her. He doesn't look like a son abandoning his mother. He looks like a frightened boy, about to confess to a crime. The atmosphere in the kitchen is so thick that Catherine can barely breathe. The smell of pancakes, once comforting, now seems nauseating. She glances from one face to the other. Their anxiety is palpable. They are not relaxed, not ready for a journey. They are as tense as violin strings, waiting for her to make the next move. Her refusal to take the envelope has created a stalemate, a moment frozen in time where 3 decades of family history are about to collide. She feels the weight of their gazes, a mixture of fear, hope, and a pain that mirrors her own. Sophie's hand on Catherine's is warm, but Catherine's is icy. The trembling in her fingers isn't just from arthritis. It's from fear, anger, confusion. She spent weeks preparing for abandonment, building an armor of pride and resignation. Now, this unexpected gesture threatens to shatter all her defenses, leaving her exposed and unprepared for whatever is inside that envelope. She thinks of all the times she'd put money on that same table. Money for rent, for food, for college books, for Sophie's lab supplies. Always her providing, always her ensuring. Receiving something in return, especially now, seems like a reversal of the natural order of things, a capitulation. To accept would be to admit that she had failed, that she could no longer support herself. And her pride, forged in the fire of years of sacrifice, refuses to yield. But their persistence intrigues her. There is no relief on their faces, only a desperate urgency. "It's not what you think, Mother," Sophie whispers, her eyes filled with tears. The vulnerability of her daughter, always so strong and controlled, begins to erode Catherine's armor. She looks at the envelope again. It's just an ordinary envelope. But at that moment, it contains all the mystery and fear of her future. Slowly, with an almost physical reluctance, she releases Sophie's hand and extends her trembling fingers toward the envelope. The paper is rough under her touch. She pulls it close, its weight seeming disproportionate to its size. She turns it over in her hands, postponing the moment of truth. What could be so important? What could be worse or better than the abandonment she has already accepted? She rips open the flap with a brusque movement, the sound of the paper tearing echoing in the silent kitchen. Her eyes fall on the contents, but at first, she can't process what she sees. They are printed papers, with logos and tiny lettering. It's not money. It's not a check. It's something more, something her brain, tired and clouded with sadness, refuses to comprehend. She pulls the papers out. The first is an airline ticket. Her eyes search for the passenger's name, expecting to find Ethan's or Sophie's. But the name printed in capital letters is hers, Catherine Ann Miller. The shock is so great that she drops the paper, which floats to the table. She looks at her children, her mouth slightly open, a silent question in her wide eyes. What is this? When Catherine finally opens the envelope, her hands tremble so much the paper almost falls to the floor. It's not a severance check or a farewell letter. It's 3 first-class airline tickets. She reads her own name, Catherine Ann Miller, printed on the ticket bound for Milan. Ethan explains, his voice choked with emotion, that they never talked about leaving to abandon her, but about how to finally pull her out of that cycle of exhaustion. They've spent the last 2 years saving every penny of their new salaries so she could finally live the life she interrupted in 2002. Her name on the ticket seems unreal. Catherine Ann Miller. Destination? Milan, Italy. She picks up the paper again, her fingers tracing the letters as if they were braille, trying to confirm if they are real. She looks at the other 2 tickets, Ethan Miller, Sophie Miller, the same flight, the same destination. The 3 of them together. The word together explodes in her mind, dismantling the narrative of abandonment she has so carefully constructed. "Mom, we would never go on without you," Sophie says, tears now streaming freely down her face. "You are our home. Wherever we go, you have to be with us." The simplicity of those words hits her harder than any humiliation she has ever suffered. The truth is so overwhelmingly opposed to what she believed that her brain struggles to readjust. The pain and bitterness of the last few weeks begin to dissolve, replaced by a dizzying confusion. Ethan continues the explanation, his voice faltering. "We watched you suffer in that warehouse our whole lives. We saw you give up everything for us. As soon as we started working, our only plan was to give you back what you lost." He points to the note. "This isn't charity, Mom. It's a refund, a small payment for the life you gave us. The word refund resonates in his heart, healing the wound of pride. She remembers the secret conversations, the whispers about visas and tickets. Shame overwhelms her as she realizes how she misinterpreted everything. Their enthusiasm wasn't about escaping her, but about the joy of planning her liberation. The betrayal she felt was an illusion, a creation of her own pain and insecurity. They weren't excluding her. They were preparing the biggest surprise of her life. 2 years. They spent 2 years saving, planning, in secret. Every extra shift they worked, every luxury they denied themselves, wasn't for their future, but for hers. The magnitude of this sacrifice, a mirror of the sacrifice she made for them, is so immense that she can't contain her emotion. A sob escapes her throat. The first sound of vulnerability she's uttered in weeks. She looks at her children, truly seeing them for the first time in a long time. Not as her betrayers, but as the incredible adults she raised, adults full of love, gratitude, and a generosity that leaves her speechless. They not only remembered her sacrifices, they honored them in the deepest way possible. They didn't see her as a burden, but as the reason for everything, the person they most wanted to reward. The year 2002, which she had buried so deep, is brought to the surface. The life she interrupted. They knew. Somehow, they knew or sensed the depth of what she had lost. They weren't just offering a vacation. They were offering a second chance. The chance to pick up the story where she left off, before the weight of the world forced her to put her dreams in a dusty box. The cycle of exhaustion. Ethan's phrase perfectly describes her existence, and they saw it. They saw through her tired smiles, through her lies that everything was all right. They saw her pain, and instead of running from it, they silently worked to heal it. The love contained in that act is so pure, so powerful, that it washes away all the bitterness from her soul. She feels reborn, purified. First-class tickets are not an unnecessary luxury. They are symbolic. They didn't just want her to travel. They wanted her to be cared for, to experience the comfort and dignity that had been denied her for so long. Every detail of their plan is a declaration of love, a redress for the injustices life had inflicted upon her. Catherine lowers her head onto the table, the tickets scattered under her arms, and cries. But it's not the silent, desperate crying of the last few nights. It's a loud, cathartic cry, a deluge of emotions washing away decades of unprocessed pain. It's the cry of a mother who discovers that her love was not only received, but returned with a strength and beauty she could never have imagined. Sophie pulls a brand new violin bow, crafted by a renowned luthier, from a bag and places it in her mother's calloused hands. They explain that their plan to move to Italy was specifically designed around a music school in Cremona that accepts students of all ages for specialized courses. Ethan secured an international transfer, and Sophie already has a place at a local hospital. But the central point of it all was to bring Catherine to the cradle of classical music. The tears Catherine had held back for over 2 decades finally burst forth, washing away the pain of humiliation and the fear of being forgotten. The bow is light and perfectly balanced. The dark wood gleams in the kitchen light, and the white horsehair is immaculate. It is a work of art, an instrument of promise. Catherine holds it with a reverence she hasn't felt in years. Her fingers, which once seemed dead and stiff, now tingle with new life. The bow is not just a gift. It is a key, unlocking the door to the woman she thought had died. Cremona. The city's name echoes in her mind. The home of Stradivari, of Guarneri, the epicenter of the violin universe. It wasn't just a trip to Italy. It was a pilgrimage. Her children didn't just remember that she played the violin. They researched. They found the best place in the world for her to rekindle her passion. The depth of their thought and care is almost unbearable. a school that accepts students of all ages. The phrase removes the last barrier of her insecurity. She wouldn't be an out-of-place old lady among young prodigies. She would be a student among others, all united by their love of music. They gave her not only the opportunity, but also the confidence. They created an environment where she could not only play again, but where she could flourish. Their plan was a perfect machine, and she was at the center. Ethan's transfer, Sophie's job. Everything was built to support her dream. All her life, she had been the backbone of their dreams. Now, the roles had reversed in such a complete and beautiful way that it felt like a fairy tale. They weren't just taking her along, they were following her dream. The crying that shakes her is violent, an exorcism. Each sob releases a layer of pain. The pain of the lost dream, the pain of exhausting work, the pain of loneliness, the pain of imagined betrayal. Everything is coming out, being washed away by a wave of love and gratitude. She feels empty, but in a good way. Emptied of pain to make room for joy. She looks at the bow in her hands and then at her children's faces. They are crying with her, a cry of relief and shared love. In that moment, there are no more secrets, no more barriers. They are a family, united not only by blood, but by a deep understanding and mutual respect. The communication that was broken is restored, not with words, but with the universal language of tears and reciprocal sacrifice. The fear of being forgotten, of being disposable, dissipates like smoke. She wasn't old equipment. She was the foundation upon which they built their lives, and they returned to honor that foundation. They saw her in her entirety. The young musician, the devoted mother, the tireless worker, and they loved and valued each of those versions of her. The humiliation she felt at work, the feeling of being useless, all of that seems small and distant now. Her identity wasn't defined by her job in the warehouse or by the opinion of an insensitive supervisor. Her true identity was there, in that kitchen, reflected in her children's eyes. She was a musician. She was a beloved mother, and she was about to become both again, in perfect harmony. She clutches the bow to her chest. It's real. Everything is real. The trip, the school, the second chance, it's not a dream. It's the culmination of a lifetime of love, a love she gave unconditionally, and that now returns to her, multiplied. She lifts her head, her eyes red from crying, and smiles at her children. A genuine smile, reaching her eyes for the first time in years. "Oh, thank you," she whispers, her voice hoarse. The two words are insufficient to express the immensity of what she feels. But they understand. They stand up and hug her, the three of them together in a tight embrace that heals all wounds. The sound of crying mingles with laughter of relief. The Miller family symphony, which seemed to have reached a dissonant and tragic end, was only beginning its most beautiful movement. 3 weeks later, at Columbus International Airport, Catherine is not carrying boxes or overdue bills, but rather a light suitcase and her restored violin. She looks at Ethan and Sophie, who walk beside her with a pride she now understands as reciprocal. She realizes that her sacrifice was not an end, but the building of a legacy of love that now carries her back to herself. As she crosses the boarding gate for the transatlantic flight, Catherine Ann Miller leaves behind servitude and, for the first time in her adult life, looks to the horizon not as a limit, but as the beginning of her own symphony. The airport's sound, once chaotic and stressful, now resembles an orchestra of possibilities. The announcement of flights, the clatter of suitcase wheels on the polished floor, conversations in different languages, everything blends into a melody of departure and new beginnings. Catherine takes a deep breath. The air is no longer heavy with warehouse dust, but smells of kerosene and adventure. She holds the violin case not as a burden, but as an extension of her own arm, a part of herself that has been rediscovered. She observes her reflection in a shop window. The woman staring back at her is not the same as she was 3 weeks ago. The lines of exhaustion on her face have softened, replaced by an expression of serene anticipation. Her eyes, once dull and gray, have regained a bluish glow, reflecting the terminal lights. She is wearing a new sweater, a vibrant color that Sophie chose for her, a color she hadn't allowed herself to wear in decades. It's a small change, but one that represents a monumental inner transformation. Ethan puts an arm around her shoulders, a gesture of protection and companionship. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asks, genuine concern in his voice. Catherine turns to him and smiles, a wide, effortless smile. "I'm great, darling, more than great." For the first time, the sentence isn't a lie to hide the pain, but the purest truth. The lightness she feels is something she thought she'd lost forever. A feeling of floating that has nothing to do with the plane she's about to board. Sophie holds her other hand, intertwining their fingers. She points to the large departures board. "Look, Mom, Milan." The word glows green on the board, a beacon guiding them to a new life. Catherine feels her heart beat faster, not from panic, but from an excitement that tickles her stomach. The girl who dreamed of Juilliard, the young woman who studied with the Italian masters, was still alive inside her and was about to realize her greatest dream, decades later. As they walk toward the gate, she remembers the last time she was in an airport, more than 30 years ago, to say goodbye to her parents who were going on vacation. Back then, the airport represented departure, distance. Today, it represents union, a shared journey. She is not saying goodbye to her family. He is embarking on the greatest adventure of their lives, together. The reversal of meaning is poetic, a perfect closing of a cycle that life has granted her. She thinks of the small house in Dayton, now empty. There is no sadness in this memory. The house served its purpose. It was a nest, a refuge, a stage for sacrifices and, finally, for redemption. The walls that witnessed her silent tears now hold the echo of the joy of her liberation. Another family will live there, create other memories. The Miller family's story wasn't confined to those walls. It was flying with them to the other side of the ocean. The violin case seems to vibrate in her hand. Inside, the instrument, restored by a luthier her children found, awaits. The strings are new, the wood polished, the soul of the instrument awakened. Just like her, she knows the path won't be easy. Her fingers are still stiff, the musical theory rusty in her mind. But, for the first time, the challenge doesn't frighten her. It excites her. Music will no longer be a source of pain, but a path to healing. They settle into the comfortable first-class seats, a luxury that makes her laugh in sheer disbelief. The flight attendant offers her a glass of champagne. Catherine accepts, the icy glass between her fingers. She looks out the oval window at the runway. Outside, the Ohio sky is gray, as always, but she knows that above the clouds, the sun is shining. She just needed someone to help her through the storm to see it again. The plane begins to accelerate, pressing her gently against the seat. Catherine raises her glass, clinking it against Ethan's and Sophie's. "A toast to us," she says, her voice firm and full of emotion. "To us," they reply in unison. As the aircraft takes off, leaving the city of Dayton behind, Catherine doesn't look back. Her eyes are fixed on the blue horizon that opens up before her. The second part of her symphony was just beginning. and she could hardly wait to compose each note. And if you've made it this far, if this story touched you in any way, leave a comment below. Love always finds a way back. That way I'll know you felt this emotion along with me. If you can and want to help our channel in a more direct way, there's a link in the first pinned comment where you can contribute. Any help, no matter how small, is very important to me and the growth of the channel, and helps me continue spreading more stories like this one. But just the fact that you made it to the end already helps a lot. And if you can share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of hope, you have no idea how much that supports me. And don't go anywhere yet. I've prepared a very special video for you right here on the screen. Click on it and we'll meet there.